not a bad thing. It's thirsty.
Okay, 5:30 times. I'm gonna. Okay, great. Good evening. We're gonna have rules confirmation and public election committee day 2 of community oversight board meeting interviews. First candidate is Mr. J. Voorhees.
And for those who don't know me, I'm Reverend J. Voorhees. I'm the pastor of the City Road Chapel, United Methodist Church, located in Madison. So, do you want me to go ahead and just start with the
Yeah, please
statements?
do.
Okay. So, in terms of my interest in the Community Oversight Board, I've lived in Nashville almost 50 years now. Moved here when I was 10 years old. I grew up here, went to high school here, worked here. Nashville is home. I take a great deal of pride in this city. That is my home. But I've also recognized that my experience in this city is not universal, that there are those who have experienced a different type of city, folks that have been excluded from our city, folks that have been had a difficult time in our community. So, we're a work in progress in terms of who we're becoming as a city. And so my interest is always in how do we help our city grow to become even better, even greater than what it already was. And it's been clear to me that there are communities and individuals who have experienced a criminal justice system that has not always respected their rights, that has not always respected their dignity, and most of all, that they feel unheard in the face of their grievances. And the Community Oversight Board has proposed, seems to me, as a means for hearing their voices and offering a greater transparency in our criminal justice system. It allows our police to better serve our community, and my commitment is to that. I entered this nomination process at the request of several others in the community and some organizations and individuals. And I come with open eyes. I know how difficult this task is going to be. Frankly, it's rather daunting when I think about what's ahead of us. But I continue in the process of nomination to honor those who believe that for some reason I have the gifts that would be helpful to this work. And I hope that I do, and that's my interest, but it's to honor their interest in me. In my ministry, I've been committed to the work of reconciliation. That is, really the restoration of relationships between those who are disconnected. And my hope is that this board will create a space to allow concerns, either real or perceptual, because we know it works both ways, to be heard in a new light. My desire is to serve as a bridge between the various communities to allow for greater communication in the hope of true reconciliation and justice that may be found. I am committed to a vision of Nashville as a place that is welcoming for all, a place in which everybody's valued, a place which everybody can call home. I've experienced that. And so my work in the community, whether it's through this or whatever I do, is to make that a reality. I will continue on.
Yes, please.
No questions at this point. In terms of my background and experience, I am 58 years old. I'm a child of the 60s. And the arc of my life has been transformed and informed by the struggles for civil rights. I was born in Washington, D.C., and remember standing on a hill looking over the city as it burned in the wake of the riots after Martin Luther King's assassination. The issue of civil rights was always before me. When I first moved to Nashville, it was the year that school busing started, when integration started. And we had, at the Kings Lane Elementary School, we had a number of bomb threats related to that because people believe that we shouldn't be together. In my own Methodist tradition, I've been blessed to walk with leaders from all over the world who have been leaders in civil rights and who have been able to teach me and inform me along the way. Most of my work in the past 20 years has been working in communities that are racially diverse, that have a lot of different type of people in them, and large pockets of poverty. And so my work has led me to be involved with a number of different leaders to look at how we can work through things. The work that I've done related to Metro General Hospital is related to that because of my commitment to the underserved in this city and to try to make sure that they are served. And that's put me in relationship with, I'm a member of IMF, I'm involved with a number of different folks that are working for justice here in the city, and again, that's my commitment. I should also note that United Methodist clergy are, by sort of statute required to go through some sort of inclusivity or cultural sensitivity training every 4 years. I just finished mine last week, so that is something that has also been on the table for me. In terms of my background with the criminal justice system and policing practices, my first contact with the police was when I was 6 years old, when I decided to run away from home. And the police department in Prince George's County had to go on a county-wide search. There was an all-points bulletin out for me. And when I was found playing at my cousin's house, my parents, the first thing my parents did was make me go to the police that were gathered outside our house and personally apologize to each one of them. Frankly, I would have rather been spanked. And what I learned there was that the police were imposing with the big uniforms and they could be scary. But my experience in that moment was also positive because they were, you know, we just want to make sure you're okay. They were really supportive of me, even though they were scary. It was both ways. But again, as I've worked in the work that I do, I've come to see that a lot of folks don't have that experience of they experience one side, the imposing side. And so as I've spent time in my own life and work, I've had a lot of chance to talk to folks that have been a part of the criminal justice system, whether that's through being a minister. I spent some time as a volunteer for the public defender's office and interviewing folks that were up for jail docket. And so I've just heard the stories and understand that some folks just have not had positive experience as I had when I was 6 years old. So what all of this has revealed to me is that the system is not monolithic. There's not one experience for any particular group or individual. But it seems like racial identity, economic status, those kinds of factors affect how one experiences the criminal justice system. So I want to look at how we can, I believe that I have some skills and that experience and those stories to be able to draw on to look at how we have a more just, sorry, excuse my English, a system where folks experience respect and dignity along the way. I also want to say that I've spent a lot of time as a pastor in direct relationships with the police. And we've partnered on events. There was a big Easter egg hunt out in Antioch that I headed up for several years and had a great relationship with the precinct out there. So I respect that their job is hard, and I want to try to figure out how we help them to better do their job. Policing is a difficult job. On the one hand, many enter that as a calling to help others. On the other times, the nature of it can be adversarial and it leads to misunderstandings and violence and trauma. And for very valid reasons, that can and has led to an erosion of trust by all parties in the system. And while trust is always difficult to rebuild, I believe that with intentional conversation and respect that we can get some accountability. I want to say just one little word about accountability, if that's all right. I'm a Methodist, and in the Methodist Church, we talk about accountability and love. We were founded as a denomination that talks about how do we hold people accountable to their spiritual lives, but in a way that is loving and respectful and offers dignity. And so I understand accountability not as a negative thing, it's a positive thing. I need people to hold me accountable. I am part of a covenant for folks that hold me accountable, but I know it's always in love. And so for me, as we talk about oversight and accountability and all of those things, I really believe that it has to be done with respect, with dignity. This is about how do we help the police do a better job. And it's not that they're doing a bad job now. They're not. But it's how do we help folks improve the relationship, improve the conversation along the way. It's a hard job. I don't know if we can do it, but I'm committed to at least trying to see if we can.
Do you have any question from the committee? We have about 30 seconds.
If I can, because I know of Pastor Voorhees' work with the homeless and through Open Table, and I'm curious if you can quickly speak on your relationship with the police as it relates to the homeless community in Madison.
I think it's positive. I mean, we are you know, it's a struggle because there's difficulties in that community. But I feel like we have worked together and we've been able to work together around that issue, around folks that don't have a place to go. And, you know, we don't hesitate if there's an issue to call the police if we need to. It's an ongoing relationship.
Thank you. Any comment for the last 15
2 seconds? I
Yes.
think we're fine. I've said enough.
Really appreciate it, Mr.
Thank
Bobbie.
you. Take care.
It's good to see you, Jay.
Good to see you. Take care.
Good to see you as well. It's his daughter.
Mr. Roberts has been in a gunfight. Maybe that's what that is.
Good evening, Mr. Eric Roberts.
Hey, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself? Please have a seat and proceed your presentation.
Okay. Well, I guess the first topic was explain the interest in serving on the Community Oversight Board. Well, I guess I'm going to use just a very corny acronym here. You know, all tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for the conscious people to remain silent. And I define tyranny as, you know, severe or harsh treatment. The Oversight Board is to build bridges, is a bridge building mechanism between the citizens and the police departments that serves them. Their role is to be impartial and to ensure that things are being fairly and thoroughly addressed. Civilian oversight is essential to building community trust, which in turn makes cities safer. San Francisco's Office of Citizen Compliance was formed by ballot in '82 in response to a series of allegations of police brutality. Barbara Addert, who worked at the OCC in the '80s, said the problems existed from the very beginning. There was lack of political will to support the agency. Weak or police-connected directors were hired, and in the early days the agency was vastly underfunded, also due to politics. If you read what I submitted to you before, I'm not a politician seeking power. I've never run for public office. I do believe in a fair and just treatment for everyone. I live and vote in Davidson County. I do not have a formal or predetermined agenda. I'm a small business owner in East Nashville, which I think is one of the most diverse areas of Nashville. I have an open mind. I'm patriotic. I also never stop questioning the establishment. I greatly appreciate the Second Amendment. I have a moral compass derived from the Golden Rule. I'm empathetically connected to the community. I bring maturity and experience. I'm patient enough to answer repetitive questions, and I have a dry sense of humor. Personally, I'd like to see the board be one of the best in the nation. I will work hard to apply myself to achieve its goals. This board needs hardworking, dedicated volunteers, a team who has a desire to make this happen. I think one of the problems, the same thing that was experienced in the '80s in San Francisco, is that I think you're underfunded. And I think without good people that are willing to work and volunteer, it's going to kind of weaken the overall process and longevity of this thing. I'm willing to volunteer, and I think I meet the qualifications that you folks are looking for. So I guess that's number one. Number two, please describe your background. I'm familiar with civil rights and equity issues. Did you folks read what I wrote on my statements? Okay. I guess I could recite it for you, but I lived through the times when we had colored and white restrooms. We had black and white schools. We had black and white neighborhoods. And I've seen a lot change over I was 64 this year, so I've seen a lot change over the past 50 years anyway. As far as being involved with civil rights, I can't say that I've ever marched for anybody, but I've always treated everybody fairly. I'm aware of, one thing that kind of gets me is back in those days we had separate but equal. And that was bad. Now it seems like we're coming back to everybody, instead of being Americans or Nashvillians, they want to be separate but equal again. So, you might have to kind of forgive my quandary over this. But I think everybody's entitled to fair treatment, regardless of who they sleep with, or their race, or skin, their color, or whatever, I mean, we've been a successful business in East Nashville. We've got 45 organic Google recommendations for people of all walks of life. And we certainly wouldn't be in business today if we took that approach to people that came in and shopped with us. Criminal justice policies and practicing. I wrote something very short and curt in regards to that, I think. My only experience with criminal justice is the fact that I've had one or two occasions to have a run-in with the law. I wouldn't say it's a run-in, just I called them for help once because I was in a hostage situation. If you'd like to talk about the legal system as a whole, I do think I do believe that everybody's innocent until proven broke. I think that if you can't afford rights, it's very hard to get them. I know that might sound a little curt. Do y'all have any questions for me?
I will entertain the question from the committee. Yes.
You mentioned the hostage situation. I was looking at your materials, and so not many people we talked to have shot at another human being and been shot at by another human being, and so I'm wondering how you think that would form your perspective in if you had to deal with a situation where a police officer was making the decision to shoot or not shoot.
That's a very broad question without many facts behind it.
I mean, literally the only facts are what you gave us.
Yeah, and I can recite the facts, but how it would.
The question is basically whether you think that situation helps form how you would deal with a situation where a police officer had to shoot at somebody.
No, it wouldn't, if somebody, regardless whether they're a police officer or a citizen or whatever, if they're feared for their life, and if the only recourse they have to defend themselves is to use whatever they have at hand, it's a situation by situation. I mean, you just can't make a blanket statement that.
I think Councilman Mendez was suggesting that might provide you a unique perspective, having been in a situation like that would be similar to.
Well, I'll tell you what happens. Everything gets real still. Everything gets real small, and you get real calm. And you analyze the situation, and you make your best determination. Things just slow down, and then you decide what you're going to do about getting out of the situation that you're in. But in my opinion, things mentally, in my thought process, just slow down and it probably happens in a matter of seconds.
Yep, yep,
We're not at 10 minutes, are we?
No.
Yes.
we are.
Oh, we are.
Right on
All
time.
right.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Thank you so
very
much,
much.
Mr.
Yeah,
Roberts.
thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You're quite
Mr. Roberts?
Thank you.
So it's going to be in and out, sit, and everything, entire thing is 10 minutes.
you.
So,
You need to have 1 minute
Yes.
transition time. Hello, sir.
good evening, Mr. Scott McWilliams. Thank you for being in here. Please proceed your presentation.
So my interest in serving on a community oversight board, I was born in Flint, Michigan, spent 16 years there, grew up around the Flint area, moved to Nashville when I was 16 years old, went to John Overton High School, public school. And what I've noticed over the last several years is I feel like the city of Nashville is changing and not for the better. I'm very concerned about race relations in Nashville. I'm concerned about religious tolerance and some of the other things that the city is dealing with. So that's my interest in serving on this committee.
The next one is,
So my background. So I spent 37 years in the supply chain industry, worked in 15 different countries, about 150 different cities around the United States. And in those 15 foreign countries, managing mostly blue-collar labor force, both union and non-union. So I've worked with a lot of very diverse people over my career. I've had to learn to deal with some very complex issues in a lot of different operating environments, and I feel like I'm very good at that. I listen very carefully and try to understand the perspectives of our employers, our employees, our customers, and the people that we deal with, our suppliers. As it relates to specifically this committee, I'd like to point to kind of 4 initiatives that I've been working with. One is about 10 years ago, I went on the board of a minority business enterprise called QPSI in New Jersey, and was on that board for 6 years and served in promoting that business, not only with their employees, but in the general business environment in which they operated, 5 different cities in the U.S. Secondly, I was the chair of the Diversity Council for the International Warehouse and Logistics Association. I actually started the Diversity Council there because we were underrepresented in the industry in terms of diversity. That has done really well within that organization over the last several years. I served on the TSU Supply Chain Board for 3 years, working with all minority students, promoting supply chain in a new academic environment that TSU had just started. And fourth, I started the Geodis Women's Network within the company that I just retired from in January, promoting the interests of women in the workplace. We promoted a number of women to positions of responsibility that before that they did not have the opportunity to really seek. With regard to my experience with criminal justice and policing practices, I have no experience. I know nothing. You will see in the answer to some of my questions, though, that I do own a shooting range and a firearms training academy in West Nashville called Royal Range. I've gone through over 100 hours of firearms training. I feel like I'm very familiar with firearms, defensive tactics, taser implementation, armed intruder. We do a lot of training at our facility, mostly for, I'd say 80% is non-law enforcement. We do have some law enforcement people that are trained out there, SWAT teams and such. So.
question? Councilman Mendes?
Thank you. With the firearms training and owning a range, do you have an opinion about whether the officer shooting this last summer was justified or not justified?
I don't, because the only information I have is what I've either seen on the news or read in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And I doubt that is a comprehensive overview of what all has happened there.
Yeah.
So I would reserve judgment in both of the two instances I'm aware of.
Does any of the training you provide address a situation for law enforcement where whether force should be implemented or not?
No. No. We have what's called a simunitions room at the range where they use non-lethal firearms to practice scenarios, generally clearing a house. Brentwood Police Department is trained with us. Henry County Sheriff's Department is trained with us, but they kind of determine what training they're going to do out there.
I've been to the TBI's simulated training where what I've experienced there is basically shoot, don't shoot scenarios. Is
Yeah.
that some of what you're training?
Yeah, there's a lot of shoot, don't shoot scenarios.
Okay.
When you do the training for law, as you said, 80% is non-law enforcement.
Correct.
When you do the training for law enforcement, does that count toward their post-certification?
Probably does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does
In fact,
it,
I just completed a post-certified training regimen this week for a certified range master.
gotcha. You were saying that some of those departments kind of determine what they may be training. So do you have sort of a set training, and then if somebody comes in and says we need to do some modifications or custom?
A lot of times, the law enforcement community will determine their own training. They're just using our facility.
Gotcha. Okay.
Any other question from the committee members?
Very unique perspective. Appreciate you coming in.
One last thing I'd just like to highlight is my track record of community service. If you look back through the answers to my questions, I've spent the last 20 years in the nonprofit sector. Not to sound pompous, but I think I have an impeccable record. So I would encourage, if it comes to this, to check references, check any of those organizations, the leaders of those organizations, the time and effort I've spent promoting their interests. And that's all I'd like to say.
I really appreciate you coming
Thank you
and
very much.
spending.
Thanks a lot.
with us.
Congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you. Semi-retirement.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple of 3 minutes until next candidate comes in.
It's a good time to get some water.
Yes.
Really unique.
He was my constituent,
Oh, I see.
Okay.
but had not otherwise contacted me. His name sounded familiar, and so when he began to speak, and I reminded myself of his application.
The next applicant puts she puts a residential address in her application, but then it says for Nashville.gov publication, it says address forthcoming. So I don't know if that means she's moving or.
Old Hickory, Tennessee.
I assume that's her address, but I may ask her just if she was moving at all, or if she's in a different district.
Yeah.
Did you look to see that that's a real residential address other
I'll
than
check
it looks like?
I'll check it right now.
It looks residential.
Yeah, it
I
does.
think sometimes people just may take pause, like, oh, this is going
This
to
is
be on the
gonna go
website,
on there.
you know, and,
Yeah, it's residential.
Yeah, administration, rather council office is doing pretty good job, yeah. Verifying the address.
Yeah, I got no reason to think it's not that.
Plant needs some help.
one in the little corner, yeah, that is a sad little plant over there.
John worked for True Green for a couple of years back in the day. And, she knows how to.
She has a green thumb.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
you're
entire
coming to my house.
atrium in the AT&T building was hers, and walls.
Good evening, Miss Allie Henderson-Fitts. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, you have 10 minutes, proceed, so whenever you're ready, just,
Good evening. My name is Dr. Allie Henderson-Fitts, and I'm interested in serving on this board because I believe that it needs a perspective that I can bring. As a physician, I am trained to look at patterns, to look at trends. I am trained to take all comers. So I don't get to pick and choose, you know, who comes into my office, who comes into my clinic, who needs care. And I've learned, and you see that when you make assumptions, people don't have good outcomes. And I feel like that perspective would be a very good and a very interesting perspective on this council. Describe my background. I'm originally from Flint, Michigan. I grew up there.
This candidate was also from Flint, grew up there to be 16.
We're running from the snow.
Y'all should have met each other.
We're running from the snow, but but this is my second time around. My parents are originally from the Middle Tennessee area. They grew up in Marshall County. My dad was absolutely determined that I went to Tennessee State, so I kind of took that out of my hands, and so that's where I went for undergrad. And in 2009, literally, I got tired of the snow because I did my training in Michigan. So I'm coming back south. Civil rights and equity issues, it's been more from a medical standpoint where one of my focuses has always been practicing culturally competent medicine and understanding the diversity in patients and being able to talk to them on their level so that they understand. One of the things I always tell my patients is I will always respect you. I will always be honest with you. I will never talk down to you or be condescending to you. Now that doesn't mean you're gonna like always what I say, but there's a level of trust and respect you can garner because I truly believe that relationships are what makes the practice of medicine work. And if you don't have a trust relationship, you're just telling people what to do, prescribing pills, prescribing therapy. They're going out doing whatever they want to do. I wasted my time, I wasted their time and their copay. So, that's where my equity comes from. And then a little bit about my background in criminal justice. I think being a African American person in this country, you are indirectly or directly confronted with the criminal justice system. I have an African American husband who, when we moved into our new neighborhood, was stopped about 5 or 6 times until our joke within the family was, I think everybody on duty kind of knows who you are now, so I think you'll be okay. To the fear that I have a 16-year-old son who wears hoodies and headphones, and you gotta call his name 3 or 4 times so he can get those earbuds, out of his ear for him to be able to hear you. So that fear is there and that is real, and I'm not going to say that it isn't. And I feel like a person like me needs to be on a committee like this and a board like this, because it's not about judgments and assumptions. It's about viewing people as they are and as human beings, and just trying to do the right thing, and it's not always about being right. It's about doing the right thing. I think medicine has come a long way. It used to be very paternalistic, and now we have HCAP surveys that care about how much has your doctor communicated with you. Not whether you got the diagnosis right, not whether you prescribed the right medicine, but do you feel like your doctor listened to you? Do you feel like your doctor allowed you to ask questions? And those things mean more to the patient, ultimately, than whether or not I got their diagnosis right. They want to know that I listened. They want to know that I cared. And I think in this instance, that is what is missing. There is that relationship, that is that communication. And I think when you don't understand that, then the trends and the data are interpreted differently. And I think I offer a perspective that may be a little bit different than what everyone else may have coming to the board, but I think it's an important perspective. And I really would love the opportunity to be able to bring that perspective to the Oversight Board.
Thank you. I will entertain questions from the committee.
I'd love to ask a question.
Please.
First of all,
Councilmember Mendes.
Thank you for sharing the fears you described. I really thank you for that, and thank you for stepping forward to volunteer to be involved in this. The question I had when I was looking through this is, with you being a physician, and I'm sure your practice is busy, do you think you've got time to do this?
I mean, I do. So my job is I see patients for the VA. So I take care of our veterans, which is a whole nother, I could talk 15 minutes about that whole population, and another reason why it's important for a person like me to be on the board. And with that, I'm an administrator at the VA. So I have a little bit of flexibility in scheduling. So for me, I'm very, I need to kind of know dates and times and things like that so I could work out a schedule, because I don't think it would necessarily be fair, to my patients if I can't give them a schedule and let them know when I would be there. So if I could be afforded that, then I could definitely be able to be a part of it.
Thanks.
You mentioned in your questionnaire that you feel like you have a good capacity to analyze data, and you feel like there needs to be a lot of that data comprehension. You also mentioned sort of tangentially about, from your physician's practice, working with folks where there may have been some, interaction with the law that brought them into your care. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in that realm?
So, as a hospitalist, so what that means is you take care of anybody that comes through the ER that the ER deems need to be admitted to the hospital. So that could be heart attack or stroke from your mom or grandma, or that could be the person who overdosed on whatever. It could be the criminal who stuck something in an orifice so he could, get out of jail for 2 or 3 days. So I've seen the gamut. In Michigan, my hospital was located about 20 miles from the state prison, so we had a lot of state prisoners that were in our care. And I think, again, it's about relationship with respect, but it's also about calling a spade, at the end of the day. So often the correctional officers actually liked when I took care of their patients, because I would take care of them, I would be honest, but I didn't fall for the bull either. And so if that meant, so I'll give you just a really brief example. There was one prisoner who, on a regular basis, would always say he overdosed, but he was always overdosed on medicines that couldn't be traced. So typically when you think of overdose, you think cocaine, heroin, narcotics. Well, he was manipulative enough to say, well, I overdosed on Seroquel. Well, you can't readily test Seroquel levels. They can make you sleepy or drowsy. So I took it upon myself to keep him the extra 5 days, send his blood sample all the way to Atlanta to prove that there was no Seroquel in the system. So that when he came back, I could say to the prison, and I could say to the guards, he never ever needs to come back here again. He has been playing us for the last 5 months, and he does not ever need to come back here, not for this.
The good hospital food that you always serve.
Well, you get TV, you get nice nurses coming in, you get to talk to people. So they had an incentive to do that. So, but again, but at the end of the day, it's about respect.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other question from the committee?
One housekeeping thing, you still at the Old Hickory address? There
Yes.
was, okay, just
Yes.
making sure. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
That doesn't always come up on GPS.
No.
Do you
Thank
have
you so
any
much.
concluding statement, Dr. Henderson-Fitts?
No, again, like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to come before you. I appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions. And again, I just, at the end of the day, I hope that this board can be as diverse as possible, as open-minded as possible. And if I am afforded an opportunity to be a part of that, I would love to do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Drive safely.
I will, thank you.
So we are running on schedule.
Yeah, the way the council's office staff is going, we can't help but run on schedule.
Yes, they are like
Room
doors
breaks.
open this evening.
Iron fist.
I like it. It actually makes it
Yeah, a lot easier.
idiot-proof for us.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. James Johnson.
Good
Appreciate
evening.
coming in here.
Good evening.
Please proceed.
Okay. I guess I just read the questions and go.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, the primary reason why I applied to be a member of the Community Oversight Board, I believe it's something that's needed. I am a retired Metro Police officer, spent 17 years working for the department, and been retired now just about 7 years. But I've seen that when I left, there were changes and things going on within the department and the type of officers that the city was bringing in, that we understand time changes, but the type of officers they were bringing in were just not the type that when I came on in the mid-90s, we weren't policing the exact same way. Matter of fact, the way that we police was changed. So I felt that when it passed, the referendum, and that the Community Oversight Board was going to be created, one of the things I wanted to do was, when I applied, was bring to the forefront, whether I'm elected on the board or not, that 3 key elements that the board has to make sure happens, and that being fairness, both to the officer involved in the incident and to the community member. I also believe that transparency, there has to be transparency at all levels. I'm not saying press conferences per se, but transparency in the process, to let everybody know that the process is a board. And the third thing is accountability. Not just accountability at the level of the officer involved in the incident, but that officer has a chain of command. I mean, that officer works for the Metropolitan National Government, who has a chief of police. So it should start with the chief of police and come down, because if the officer's doing something, his chain of command has to have knowledge of it. I'm also a retired Army officer, and I don't care how high I got up in the hierarchy, I'm ultimately responsible for every officer or every soldier that worked underneath me. So that was why I put my hat or my name in the ring to become a member of the Oversight Board, to make sure that at a minimum those 3 things were taken into consideration. My background, I've lived in the Nashville area for about 27 years. Like I said earlier, I am a retired Metro Police sergeant. I spent 17 years in patrol, and I also was the chief pilot for the aviation section. I'm a helicopter pilot. So I got to wear that hat of officer and the hat of supervisor. I have been that supervisor that got that phone call from the citizen saying, hey, officer such and such did this, where I had to go out and investigate that complaint. And when I go out and look at a complaint, regardless of the nature of it, I go out with blinders off. I go out with an objective mindset. You have to go out. I listen to both sides. I listen to the citizen first, I listen to the officer. One thing I have developed over the years that I'll say, there's 3 sides to every story. I mean, I've be it a minor traffic accident or be it a domestic dispute, and 2 people are there at the same time. Their stories vary, but that's why we do the investigation, to get that third, what really happened. So that was my background. I've also worked as an adjunct college professor at the University of Phoenix, where I taught criminal justice courses. As for civil rights, I'm a product of the civil rights movement in the 60s. I was born in the 60s. I got to experience some of that firsthand, being from Florida. It was interesting, to say the least. The Martin Luther King Jr. era was big for African Americans. And what I'm beginning to see now is where this whole thing is made a 360-degree circle. We're almost getting right back to where we were in the 60s with the sit-ins, the Black Lives Matter, the Me Too, all these different movements. And are they justifiable? Yes, these people feel they're being dumped on or not being taken seriously. But that being said, I have a broad background of knowledge as it pertains to civil rights. One thing I've noticed, having been a police officer, as a country, most citizens that I've dealt with in the metro area and that I've talked to when I teach college, they don't know their constitutional rights. So if you don't know your constitutional rights, how do you know if your civil rights are being violated? Because that's the bigger scope. And a lot of what you see on television isn't how it is in the real world. But and to describe my background quickly with the criminal justice and police practicing, 17 years. I worked the streets. I've done the DUI task force. I've worked South Precinct, East Precinct. I live in the Antioch area. And I've been in the front line. I've seen it. I'm a firm believer in community policing. That's something that the police department has gotten away from. The late 90s, we became a stat-driven police department where numbers. And we stopped putting that personal touch of service on a call. I remember back when I came on, we knew people in our zones. I mean, hey, Mr. Jones, if there was something going on, guess what? Mr. Jones called Officer Johnson and said, hey, you might want to know they're doing this over here. Now, it's all about numbers. How fast can you get off this call? How many traffic stops can we do? It's sad, a lot of what is transpiring in the news media, a lot of it. I was up in Chicago this past weekend, and it's commonplace in Chicago that they expect any weekend to have 10 or more homicides. It's just natural in that certain part of town. And when the police try to intervene, the public's, it's a big divide. I mean, there is I won't say a fine line, there is a line between the police trying to do their job and the citizens trying to help the police, or the citizens wanting the police's help. So I don't want to see Nashville come to that point. And I think it can be headed off quickly and efficiently with this Community Oversight Board. I think it's something that's needed. I think this first board will be the hardest of all of them, because they've got to set the precedent. This is how we will do business. And based on what transpires, I say during this first year, is how serious or not the public will take the board as a whole and the recommendations they put forward. But I find it interesting, one of the questions the board, you guys asked about civil rights and equity issues. We interviewed during the police department hiring practice. That is a question they need to ask these officers that they're vetting and hiring to be police officers now. That's an important question, because you can walk with any police officer and ask them that question right now, and I bet you get a stone look like, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. But that's my interest in becoming a member of the board. I also was a member of the Metro Benefit Board as the police department's representative for 3 years prior to my retirement. And that gave me an inner working of how boards and committees work within Metro government. I mean, you just can't say we're going to do it like this and it's done. There's a process involved, and I just feel that I would bring a diverse way of thinking, an open mind, many years of law enforcement, both in the real world and behind the podium. So I did teach criminal justice, and just here to try to make our communities. The city is right now is so divided. It's sad. How do we fix that? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long, drawn out ordeal. The police department as a whole, I think, I don't know, being an African American male, I'm in the same boat that everybody else is in now. I make sure my headlights are on. I have had no real interaction in a negative way with the police department, but hey, when I'm driving my personal vehicle, I'm just like, unless it's somebody that I work with that might know me, I'm just like John Q. I watch what I say. I tell my students the same thing. That first interaction you have with the police officer dictates how that interaction is going to go as a whole. I mean, because a lot of the guys they're hiring now. I remember I asked one of my students who was he worked for Nolensville Police Department. I asked him, I said, prior to you getting this job here, what was your dealings, if any, with African Americans? Zero. They only know what they see on television.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Johnson.
Okay, guys.
And thank you
We
for your
appreciate
service.
your time.
All right.
Mr. Johnson, thank you for your service.
Okay, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you.
Here we go. Just have a seat at the end.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Todd.
Good
Thank you for
evening.
being in here.
You're my council person.
Oh, very nice.
Nice to
Being
see
with
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your service. I saw in the paper you were not re-upping,
Yes.
for lack of a better term.
Well, we have 10 minutes. Whenever you're ready, please proceed your presentation.
Well, I'm Jim Todd, and I'm an attorney, and I've been involved in criminal law for about 27 years. 13 years as a prosecutor, and now 14 years as a defense attorney. And I hate to say it, but I think in my years, I've never seen a relationship between the public and the police department, and now the police department and the district attorney's office, worse. It is terrible. And it's sad. And we have a great criminal justice system. It's over 200 years old with the grand jury, but I think most people rightly think that the grand jury is controlled by the district attorney's office. In Tennessee, it's not transparent. It is secretive, and people don't trust it. I'm very familiar with the Office of Professional Accountability, OPA. I've worked cases up there too. They do a great job, but they're secretive as well. Until their cases are closed, what happens at OPA is secretive, and I think people have a distrust now for the police department, and I think that has to be fixed. I think I'm uniquely qualified because of my background. I also have background in civil rights litigation, having practiced in federal court both in Middle Tennessee and other states, and have had civil rights cases, and they're very, very important. When people's rights are violated by state actors under the color of law, that's probably the most egregious thing that I think that can happen in this country, frankly. I put in my application, and I'm not really sure what the board's going to do, but I think the board also has a duty to represent the police department. I think, in my experience with police officers as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, there are some great people. And there are some great people that become bad police officers because they're underpaid, they're underappreciated, they have to work extra jobs to make ends meet, they're tired, and they don't get any time to decompress. And consequently, they get placed in these high-octane situations and act inappropriately. And I think that's something that the board, I hope, could address to the council. I think body cameras are absolutely critical. I think if you asked Mark Chestnut, who was the officer who was shot on I-40 in Bellevue 8 years ago, whose car actually had a camera, one of the few cars that do, he would tell you that cameras are critical. And I think the community would feel a lot better knowing that the police department had them. Small police departments like Vanderbilt and MTSU have them. Even the Alcohol Board Commission people have them, and they only investigate drinking under 21. So I know it's expensive, but the police should have them. So I think I'm uniquely qualified because I've also served on boards before. I was chairman of Governor Sunquist's Juvenile Justice Reform Commission that met for 2 years to rewrite the juvenile code, none of it which was enacted. And I've been on the board of the Urban League, the Nashville Ballet, and NARAL, and other groups like that. So I think I have experience working with people.
Thank you. Entertain question from the committee?
So, Mr. Todd, one of the things that I think we're wrestling with is in the I'm wrestling with, I don't know about anybody else. In the 150 plus batch of folks, we could have all-star team of the National Bar Association, just from the lawyers. And I'm wondering whether you've got any sense about how you think we should try to weed through the impressive batch of lawyers, including yourself.
Well, I guess you have to brag about yourself if you're applying for a job. And I didn't really look at the list that closely. But you've asked for experience in criminal justice, and I have it. You've asked for experience in policing, and I have it. I've been taught at the police academy. And you've asked experience in civil rights, and I have that as well. And I don't know if the other candidates do or not, but I do.
Fair enough, thanks.
And my experience working with boards and commissions, I think that's important as well. I think you have to work with other people. I think you have to work with other people from other environments to look at their viewpoints, accept their viewpoints, don't dismiss their viewpoints. I think you have to have people on the board that aren't lawyers, and those people have an extreme learning curve.
So there's 11 total. What do you think the right mix is, lawyers and non-lawyers?
11 total? I'd say 50-50. I think a lot of non-lawyers are smarter than lawyers when it comes to common sense things, but this area of the law is extremely complicated and complex. And I think, we want transparency, but in some situations you can't have it. I think Councilman Pridemore would be the first to tell you that you can't go in an ongoing investigation and release everything, because that'll just taint the witnesses that you're talking to. So that's a very, very difficult thing that you have to balance.
Fair enough.
Any other questions from the committees?
That was very thorough, thank you.
Thank you for, I know this has
Statement?
created a lot more work for you guys, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Yes,
And
indeed.
I'm so happy that we have this coming, whoever's a part of it.
Thanks, James.
All right, good to see you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Todd, I really appreciate it.
Good to see you again, and thank you again.
Thank you.
I live up on Rolling Fork Court,
Oh, yes.
way up on top of the hill.
Yes, yes.
All the beautiful land is. I love that area of town.
Oh, me
Well,
too.
you know, when people leave Nashville, we put magnets in all their luggage so that they come back eventually.
That's what happened with me. All right, have a good night.
Thank you so much, thank you. Colleagues, just for the viewing audience, after Mr. Horrar, I'm gonna have to leave to go to a community meeting, so I'm gonna hear his interview and then I will head on my way.
Yes, please give my regards to Health Trust
I will.
community.
I
You
will.
know, somebody has to stay, so I will
I
stay.
appreciate that, yeah. Council Lady Johnson and I have a community kind of between Bellevue and it's
Yes.
up on a hilltop, and very oddly, I represent some people a little bit at the bottom, and then on one side over here, and then way up at the top on the back. It was one of those ones where we kind of say, I wonder how the planning
Right.
Yes.
commission drew this one, but it is, yeah, so they're having their annual meeting this evening, so.
Yeah, redistricting is one of the biggest headaches you could ever go through, but yeah, there are some communities throughout the county where you think, I get that they went around, along this road or avenue, but they
Or
may
creeks,
split
I've
a
got some of
community,
those.
you
Yeah.
know, along the way.
The
Southern part of my
challenge is
district
try
is a
to,
creek.
contain one subdivision and community in one district.
It's been and listening to new redistricting things going on around the state, the thought about keeping communities whole
Right.
has been
Yeah, and this becomes challenging in that, there's hardly even a logic as well, because there's like spatially, okay, I'm down here, but then I represent maybe 7 or 8 people up at the tippy top of the hill, very far away, and it's kind of, it was just, I think it was somewhat of a line, and then it kind of got that, so it's hard for that community to know who they contact. I mean, we
Right.
just, we
Which
we always-
district am I?
And then it's also split between GSD and USD, internal to one
Well, that's a
community
bigger issue.
that has one road in and one road out.
You see this thing going on the 8th? The whole day.
I guess I didn't see that. One is
We push the next
Yeah.
person.
Oh, yeah.
National Conference of African American History and Culture.
I always want to go to that,
I-
and the timing
It's
is
really
just really
good.
tough,
This
yeah.
year. It's all day on Friday, the 8th.
February 8th.
Yeah. We've got another reminder from the historic.
Yeah, that's all,
You lost me at all day.
I know, but,
But it's good, you
There's
can
good
see,
breaks.
yeah, you could pick out a few that,
and, yeah, they have a pretty long break at lunch too. There's entertainment at the end of the day.
why didn't we schedule entertainment at the end of
That's right.
Alright. Try to go.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Robert Horrar. Thank you for being in here.
Thank you. I'm Bob Horrar. Nice to meet all of you.
nice to meet you, sir.
We have 10 minutes to spend together, so whenever you're ready, please proceed your presentation.
Okay, well, I'll start with number one. I have an interest in serving on the Oversight Committee because I believe, and this overlaps a little bit with one of the other questions, I believe the community should have a voice. And I don't think there's a voice. When you look at a police incident, who investigates them? Another police agency. You know, it's a checker checking the checkers. So I think the Oversight Committee has a short-term objective of having representing the community and their voice in various incidents that occur. I also think it has a long-term objective of looking at processes, policies, and training and understanding how all of that is going on. Because in my experience, I guess you saw that on my background, I served on the Kentucky State Police Promotional Board for 7 years. And in that process, it evolved into something that was very, very good. We didn't do all that by ourselves. We made a study of best-known practices because on that board, they had to have 2 people from other police agencies outside the state, contiguous states. And they brought their ideas and contributions to it, and the process evolved into one that was extremely strong. So my background is human resources. I can go into that if you like. I had to, in my role, I had to sit in judgment of all employees. It was my role. I had to decide fair and impartially what was right and what was not right. And I can tell you, I took that job very seriously because my boss told me 20 years before, he said, you are to be an advocate for the employees. And that was my role. And I had to understand human behavior and why people do what they do, which is a very complex process, believe it or not. I have a friend who's a clinical psychologist who has coached me for the last 20 years, and I got pretty good at it. So back to my original premise, I think the Oversight Committee has a short-term objective of representing the community and looking into incidents fair and impartially. I think it has a longer-term objective, looking at policies, processes, and training to make sure that that's being handled properly. And to look at best-known practices outside the state of Tennessee. We don't want to be, well, you understand that. Okay, does that kind of elaborate? I went beyond the first question. My background is human resources. I said I was Chief Human Resource Officer for 2 Fortune 500 companies. I ran all functions of HR, which everything from labor relations to recruiting and training. Our recruiting, I believe, was a strategic function that contributed to the company's objectives, because hiring the best people for the job, you got good results. And we evolved a process that some of the larger consulting companies said it was state-of-the-art. And it was a 5-step process. It's rather detailed, but basically we evolved into case study kinds of interview questions as well as psychological profiles that were benchmarked against the very best people doing that particular job. That way you had a yardstick. And so it was a 6-step process, and it evolved over a period of about 10 years. And at the end of when I retired about 4 years ago, the company was hiring the best people they could possibly get, and outside executive search firms that tried to work with us, they couldn't work with us because we did everything they did and then some. So it was a good process. The outside market said it was. So I really understand recruiting, and the reason I bring that up is I think there are policemen out there that don't need to be policemen for lots of different reasons. And I think the police need to look at their selection process, and they've got a recruiting problem right now. They can't find enough warm bodies to fill the jobs, okay? But at the same time, if you're going to hire somebody, you've got to hire the right person. that is a preventative measure. So I think that process needs to be looked at carefully, as well as training and other things. I'm certified in human resources through several outside organizations. Doesn't really matter for this purposes.
We're not supposed to interrupt people, but let me ask you
ahead.
this real quick.
Yeah.
Since you're the HR professional,
Yeah.
so we're trying to hire for this board,
Yeah.
and we don't have anybody sitting in the position right now, so we can't do like any benchmarking, because we're just making it up, we're creating the board from scratch. As somebody who's ran giant HR groups, what should we be looking for? How should we be going about the process of how to fill these spots?
Well, you're doing something right to begin with. You're asking applicants on the oversight board exactly the same questions. That way you have a common yardstick to measure. I've used that technique myself, and it's a good one. So you can compare answers.
So I just blew it by asking off menu.
You did something well. You did something well. I don't want to get into a lecture, but part of my, I'm a natural teacher, okay? I have that knack. There are questions you answer yes or no. There are questions begin who, what, when, why, where. There are other kinds of questions that evolve into give me examples of how you did this. And you had one of your questions on your questionnaire was like that. And then there are the case study questions that have to be realistically based. And so for the purposes of selecting people, I think you're off to a good start. Asking people 3 core questions, and you'll be able to compare answers. And what I bring to the table is experience with human resources, human behavior, being fair and impartial, being able to look objectively at situations. I'm an organizer. I don't tolerate committees that go on and on and on and get nothing done. And so I'm pretty organized when it comes to committee meetings. We have to have a published agenda. We stick to it and make sure everybody knows what we're supposed to do, everybody's role. But you're off to a good start.
We'd like to make sure that you get the
Yeah, I'm
second
sorry for getting
question.
you off topic.
Second, my background?
Civil rights.
The civil rights, what your experience has been in the civil rights.
Well, my criminal police background is with the state police, and I served 3 years on the Kentucky State Personnel Board. Most of that were complaints and grievances, and dealing fair and impartially with that. In terms of civil rights, it's nothing beyond affirmative action plans, diversity training. We did a significant amount of that because we had 200 hospitals, and it was a very, very large job. So I'm familiar with all of that. But beyond civil rights in private business, you really don't get into that. It's more diversity training and the other thing I mentioned. So.
Any other question from the committee members?
In the experience with the Kentucky State Police Training Board, kind of when you were doing that interaction, obviously you're interacting with the state police. What did that look like when you presented suggestions, and what kind of feedback did you
Good question. The first time I went up there, they had to have 1 civilian member, and that was it. 3 from Kentucky State Police, 2 from outside police agencies. And when I first went up there, there was a lot of resistance to my suggestions and observations. And I found that if I had a good, logical, and sound argument for it, that eventually I could convince them to come along with me. It took a while to get there. But after a while, I was able to convince 5 other policemen that were all ranks of captain or above to go along with me. A lot of times I was the dissenting vote, and I was able to turn them around, and they had to agree with me. And not that I'm smarter than anybody else, but I had a lot of experience dealing with leadership training and recruiting people and understanding all these kind of things, and so I had a good argument for it. Now, I will say, on the other side of the coin, they were able to change my mind on some things. So it wasn't me trying to dictate everything. They were able to sway my opinion on things. And we would typically have 15 to 20 people coming up for promotion. And it was a process that ran, for 3 weeks. And so there was a lot of discussion, but towards the end, I was able to educate them in terms of what they should be looking for, and they were able to educate me in terms of their organization and what they needed. So there was a mutual understanding there. So it took a while to get there. It didn't happen overnight. But I felt like I think they liked my work, because when I left, they made me an honorary colonel in the Kentucky State Police. That 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee. But it was a nice recognition for a job they liked.
Do you have any question? Last 1 minute. Any closing?
Closing statement?
Statement.
I would truly welcome an opportunity to serve on the Oversight Board. I think I would be a real asset. I think my background will probably be somewhat unique in terms of some of the people that you're interviewing, and I think I bring a lot to the table.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Council Lady Henderson. Hope you enjoy the community
Say
meeting.
hi to Harper's Trace for you.
Drive
Thank you.
safely.
When does it get real cold?
I don't,
Sunday?
I think it's late Saturday.
yeah, Saturday
Like
then.
overnight, it's.
They moved the inauguration
Push
inside.
that next
And, the march is gonna be in trouble.
Good evening, Mr.
Moorefield.
Moorefield.
Yes, how are you?
Thank you for being here, appreciate it. So we have 10 minutes to spend together, so
Okay.
please proceed to
So
your
I have a written
presentation.
statement, is that okay?
However you feel comfortable.
Okay, hopefully it's not 10 minutes of writing, but, and I do want to say too that I think it kind of overlaps between the questions, so I won't be breaking like question 1, 2, or 3.
No, we are easy, that's all.
Okay, so you ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So beginning with my interest in serving on the Community Oversight Board and the reasons I wish to serve. When creation of the board was passed in the November election, I knew that I would apply for membership. My interest in criminal justice and policing has been with me from college in the late 1980s, when criminal justice was my minor field of study, to the 2011 Citizens Police Academy, which I participated in for fun and learning, and to the current day, when we live in a time where advancements in technology have allowed for public viewing and much discourse of police activity. My earliest known incident of a controversial police-involved shooting was the 1990 case of Officer Bill Sneed and citizen Jackie Brooks. I was in college at the time and had already selected criminal justice as my matter, but I was so touched by that case that I have not forgotten many of the specifics, including the reactions of my father, who was born in 1935 and had lived through the Civil Rights era. Even then, my view of the role of the police has not been tainted over time. I believe in the ability of police organizations to protect and serve, and to do so within a reasonable set of standards. Like any profession, there will be officers who are adequate or excel in their duties, and there will be those who do not. I believe it will be imperative of the board to find a way to make sure that hiring of police leans more towards those who are adequate and excel. I have been nominated to the Community Oversight Board by the NAACP, an organization where the newly installed president is personally familiar with my educational background, commitment to the community, and an analytical skill set believed to be worthy of board membership. As written in Section 11.1302, the first duty of the board is to investigate allegations of police misconduct against members of the public and issue advisory and resolution reports assessing allegations of misconduct. Skills that I possess that will be of particular use are decades of customer service and sales training and analytical work and study that would be invaluable in the questioning and documentation of witnesses. Daily handling of protected health information, or PHI as you may know it, provides me with the experience of collecting, protecting, and using confidential data for stated purposes and without breach. A calm and steady temperament and thick skin grown from decades of working with physicians, office managers, and business executives. Independent, it's true. Independence of thought without an axe to grind, motivated to be fair and unbiased in assessment of actions and behavior. My first personal experience with the police occurred when I was in the 6th grade, and a man had begun to sit in his car and expose himself on my daily walk home from Fort Greene School. About 4 of us that walked that route were involved by the police in a sting operation where the police attempted to catch the man in the act. Perhaps it is that early experience, while very scary at the time, that gave me the confidence in the idea of policing. On the other hand, it is easy for me to understand how a person's first interaction with police that is negative can shape that person's perspective in the opposite direction for a long time to come, perhaps forever. The ability to understand just this circumstance will be important for board members who will need to be able to place themselves in another person's shoes and recognize bias that may exist with both the police and the civilian. I've also completed foster parent training, which provided me an understanding and insight into neglected and abused children and the best methods to care for and discipline them, as well as the knowledge of development of brain activity of neglected children, which is not on par for their age. I have organized volunteer activities with Second Harvest Food Bank of Minnesota. I volunteer regularly with Susan G. Komen Foundation, the American Cancer Society. I have in the past with Tennessee Breast Cancer Coalition, National Black Leadership Initiative on Cancer, and the Nashville Jazz Society, which is way off from the others. But I'm a two-time breast cancer survivor, so most of my volunteer activities are around those type of organizations. I've created a nonprofit, the Georgia Wallace Sims Memorial Foundation, in 2018, and I've served on the board of the Oakland Patriot Youth Athletic Organization in 2013. I also was recently nominated to serve on the board of JUMP, but I haven't sent my application in yet. My education includes my degree from, it was Memphis State at the time, I'm old, the University of Memphis, cum laude, Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. My minor, as I said, was Criminal Justice. I graduated in 1991, semester early. I have a Master of Science in Public Health from Harry from 1999, where I wrote a thesis there, so I have significant research and analysis experience. I also have 9 hours of graduate work in criminal justice from MTSU in 1993. So being a native Nashvilleian, raised on Alvarez Street, practically on the campus of Meharry Medical College, I believe it should be of significant interest to this committee that I have the unique experience of having lifelong friendships and acquaintances from North Nashville, including the John Henry Hale and Preston Taylor communities, where I enjoyed many sleepovers in middle and high school. Members of these neighborhoods will quickly assess the utility of the board based on the background and familiarity of its members. At my age, it is likely the children of my peers who are the demographic that has raised the most concern from recent analyses completed by the Policing Project and Gideon's Army. As the board will certainly be required to face out to the community it serves, I believe it's important for parents of this demographic to see someone who looks like them, who will be relatable and trusted and assist in public confidence in the board's activities. Almost finished. Getting there. So the board will be responsible for recommendations to agencies involved in public safety and the administration of justice, and have the option of establishing a monitoring program for ongoing review and auditing. I have experience in written communication, including policy development and review of those policies by legal representatives, which is a significant duty of my job as a senior business process consultant. My study of LEAN principles, and LEAN stands for Locate, Evaluate, Assess, and Normalize Procedures, will be useful for the review and analysis of existing procedures or where there are non-existent procedures, and documenting the process for review and recommendations. My personal experience with civil rights issues would begin in the late 70s and early 80s with the busing and reorganization of school zoning. Although I was very young, I do recall it being controversial that my older siblings and I would be bused from Alvarez Street in North Nashville to Norman Binkley Elementary in a predominantly white neighborhood of South Nashville. However, I can attest that I received a very good foundation for learning there. I was tested as above my grade level and was suggested to skip a grade, but my mom did not agree, and I stayed with peers my own age. Of course, Nashville is very well known for the student lunch counter sit-ins of the 1960s and various marches and economic boycotts that led to the desegregation of lunch counters and stores downtown. Nashville is also well known for the 4 colleges opened here in the 1800s and early 20th century for the purpose of educating black students that were not welcome in traditional universities. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was legislation that outlawed discrimination based on race, sexual orientation, and religion. However, the fight for equality has not ended for African Americans, women, and the LGBTQ communities in particular. parity in sentencing, mortgage lending, job seeking, and policing practices within Black communities are areas that are still problematic for many. So, as previously noted, my experience with criminal justice and policing includes formal education and participating in the Citizens Police Academy. I've been a strong observer of the MNPD over the years, such as changes in leadership, opening of additional precincts, renewed efforts of community policing, such as substations and the bicycle and horse patrols, and recruiting via community outreach initiatives. I'm a firm believer that diversity of police men and women is key to strengthening relations within the community.
Thank you so much. You utilized 10 minutes so wisely, so you didn't leave us any questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I did? Oh, okay, well, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
You
for
all
working
have a good
women's
evening.
health too. That's critical.
So she nailed that on 10 minutes?
Yes,
Yeah,
just 10
like-
minutes.
exactly.
I saw her
Amazingly.
flip over. I didn't think she was gonna make it.
That was pretty impressive.
Yes. This next one, please.
Shown yet, so if they come within the next 10 minutes, we'll bring them back.
Okay.
Alright.
I wonder, what numbers there are in the other rooms.
I skimmed the videos last night of the people that I wanted to see.
Yeah,
Oh, yep, sorry. Thank you.
and, the interviews make good, background, it's like a podcast, you can like listen to them while you're doing other stuff,
That's smart.
right? Turned one room on for a couple hours and another room.
I mean, ITS is doing a really great job. I was so surprised, you know, after 2 hours it was up, you know,
Yeah.
all full committee rooms. Thank you.
I think it helps them being able to leave it on instead of having to go back and edit and stuff.
Well,
It's
you know,
just single file.
their usual turnaround time, like the tax increment financing study group, it's like 2-3 business days.
Yeah.
Is sort of, I think, their usual turnaround time. Because we're running a good 2 hours for most of those.
Yeah.
Because I think they can throw up something that's 15-20 minutes pretty quickly. But I think the 2-hour ones take a little processing.
So are they? I haven't seen them on you. Are they cutting them up, or is
No.
it just
No,
the full
just the full
session?
session.
It's like
Yes.
what we're talking about right now.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I got that. But
Excuse me.
But those monitors really help, because
You can
if
just-
you're
You can
looking
tell
for a
who-
person,
for a person.
you can slide,
Yeah, it really does.
click and drag the slider to find the
they're
person.
pretty. It's interesting. Okay.
Here we go.
Good evening. Please have a seat over here. Mr. Daniel Alvarez. So we lost a few minutes, so please proceed.
Sorry, how are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Good, good.
So you know the questions, so if you wanna give us your backgrounds and presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so my name is Daniel Alvarez. Sorry, I'm really nervous. I was running up the stairs, I'm so
Don't worry.
sorry. Yeah, so I'm actually from Venezuela. I grew up here in Nashville since 2005. I moved here January 25th, actually, 2005. So coming up on like 14 years. So been here for a minute. I went to Apollo Middle School here. I went to Antioch High School as well. I graduated Antioch High School. Currently, I'm a legal assistant for Charles Reed. Sorry guys, I'm really nervous. So yeah, so that's kind of my background. I've been a bartender for a very long time, and I switched careers now. I've been doing paralegal work and legal assistant for Charles for about almost a year now. I've been doing that, so it's kind of like my background, which was what I'm doing. It's kind of how I got involved with, you know, the whole Community Oversight Board. So one of the reasons why I would like to be on the Community Oversight Board is because I feel like I offer a different perspective to for the Community Oversight Board. I feel like when I was a little younger, I felt like I didn't have a voice being with the Latinx community. I didn't feel like my voice mattered very much up until I started doing this new career that I'm doing now. And I'm sorry guys. So what I'm doing now, and so it's it's a big career change for me. And once I started doing policy practicing and legal research and all that stuff for Charles, I felt like I had a little bit of more education, more empowerment, a little more of a voice. And I feel like if I could be that voice for people kind of like me, like a couple years back that felt like didn't have a voice, if I can be that voice for other people, I feel like if somebody should do it, you know, at least you just need one person to do it, is what I mean to say. So why not be that person? So that's why I feel like I would be a good, you know, asset to the Community Oversight Board because of what I can bring to the table and, you know, different perspectives and point of views. So, well, my background with civil rights and equity issues, you know, I personally, you know, see these cases with our clients. We kind of cater more to the Hispanic community when it comes to Charles's business. And I see how a lot of our clients get treated very unfairly because of the fact that they don't speak English. And you know, we try to, you know, level the playing field, educating our I don't like to call them clients, like our people, to educate them, you know, to let them know that, you know, regardless of your status, you have rights, you know, your basic rights or civil rights. So kind of goes to everything that I've kind of been doing. And that's how I got into the Community Oversight Board with the Mix, which is the organization that I'm a part of. We did a lot of push for the Community Oversight Board, and I started getting into it a lot more, started doing a lot more research. And, you know, like, I like the idea of there being transparency and accountability for anybody, you know, not just police officers, just anybody that commits something or does something wrong. I feel like everybody should have, like, consequences. So, yeah. And, but yeah, I think.
You had your petition. You were also nominated by the group you mentioned, the
Yes,
Mix.
sir.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization?
So yeah, the Mix is an organization that what we do is try to educate, you know, the Latinx community specifically for now, because we're still a small organization, but we're starting off with Latinx community. So the Mix stands for Movimiento Incluyendo X, or in English, movements including X, and X could be anyone, anything that you want to stand up for, anything that you feel that is right. You know, we would try to back you up. You know, if us as a group are in agreement that it's something that we should do. And so that's what we do. We do workshops, like Know Your Right workshops for Latinx community. Kind of like empowerment through education is kind of our goal right now. Our like mission statement at the moment. So that's what we're doing with the Mix right now.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Any question?
Obviously, I don't want to have you tell us about any particular clients, but just you mentioned that that work has helped inform you about issues. So I'm just curious what are the sorts of issues that you deal with at work?
So, for example, we have I'll give you a perfect example. We have this one gentleman that he has a charge for a just regular no driver's license, he got sentenced to 6 months in jail and 1 year probation for no driver's license. And I personally have been also pulled over for no driver's license way back when, and I didn't have to go through that. And I feel like it shouldn't be that way. You know, that person didn't speak any English. Obviously, he's a little darker than I am. You know, I understand that I'm a little white passing, and you know, if you wouldn't really know me, you wouldn't understand. You wouldn't know that I'm actually Latino background unless I'm like talking like from Miami or something like that. But you know, so it goes back to you know, equality. It shouldn't be that way. You know, some person that gets pulled over for no driver's license shouldn't have to do more time than necessary just because of the fact that they can't speak Spanish. Or, you know, they don't explain to them their rights correctly, or they don't take the time out to at least try. So it goes back to everything that I'm doing, that I've been doing, is fighting for rights. You know, fighting for everybody should be treated fairly, equally, because I feel like it should be something that shouldn't have to be fought for, but unfortunately has to be fought for. So, and if I have to be one of those people that fight and be scared and nervous doing interviews like this, then why not? You know? So that's kind of... Yes.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Do you have any closing statement you have?
Well, I appreciate you guys for taking the time to listen to me. Sorry I was late. I do it all the time. I didn't mean to do it today.
No problem.
But
blame it on the Nashville traffic.
Yeah.
Everybody believes
It's because I was right off the street. But no, I really hope you guys take me into consideration, and And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
I really appreciate your
Not a
participation
problem.
and the willingness.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
guys. Oh, not a problem. Thank you. Nice to meet
Thank
you
you.
guys. I'm trying to shake you guys'
Oh,
hand.
thank you, man.
No problem. So my hands are sweating. I'm really nervous.
You're okay.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Well, you look much better than yesterday, though.
That's
Yeah.
modern medicine.
Coughing less and feeling better.
Yeah,
Yep.
feeling a little bit better.
Good evening, Mr. Matt Crum.
Yeah.
Please have a seat.
Sure.
You got 10 minutes to spend with us, and however you feel comfortable, you can present your case to us.
Sure. I'll say for me, I was nominated by the Libertarian Party here in Nashville, and I think for a variety of reasons, I think. So one of the things that are really important for the party and for those values are transparency is a big piece of that. And so we were really interested and curious and skeptical of the COB originally, and we invited Dr. Sekou Franklin to come and speak, and it was just a really good opportunity to learn. And so with that, a lot of us ended up supporting the COB, and for that ability to have a little bit more transparency essentially in these systems. And so I think for me, why I can't speak for everyone, but I think why I was selected is essentially my background in activism and working for people my entire career essentially. And so from college, doing work with different campus organizations like InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. We led HIV/AIDS campaigns when other organizations really weren't interested in touching that, and we built coalitions with the LGBTQ communities, with the Muslim communities, all around advocacy around some of these issues. And that went on to working with an organization called World Vision. They're one of the larger nonprofits, and from that, my background is in computer science and global development, and so from there, working on ways to be able to communicate these issues a lot better, essentially to mostly at that point in time, it was a lot around college-age students for the most part. And then from there, I simultaneously was getting a master's in Boulder, Colorado, at CU Boulder, in global development and technology. That is a field. It sounds very specific, but it's actually really broad because you end up having to work with so many different sectors, essentially. So how does this affect? How does technology affect education? Like, how does technology affect all these different aspects, health, and all these different other pieces? And so from there, I did some work with, I moved out to San Francisco, in Oakland actually, and worked for an organization called Invenio, and so they were basically a startup. We did a lot of work with USAID, which is, so that's federal grants, essentially. Again, a lot of overseas work, probably worked in about 15 or so, or a dozen to 15 or so countries on the ground, and a lot more remotely, essentially around how to, around community development and justice issues, essentially. And so women's empowerment and some of these other issues, HIV/AIDS is another one that we had done a lot of work with, and a lot with education and a lot with health. And so from that, I actually moved here for one of our clients, had a really good opportunity for that fit my skill set a lot. which was with UMCOM, which is the United Methodist Communications, who I work with now. And so I work still with their kind of, we call it Central Conference, which is like basically Africa and the Philippines. And so I work on projects for them to also to be able to help other churches' missions around health, education, and these other things. And so we'll work with other agencies, other organizations to be able to push forward on those kind of issues. So alongside of that, I think a lot of my peers in the Libertarian Party were also had seen that we've done a lot of work around criminal justice reform, and that's something that's really important to us. And it's not, for us, we just want to see things happen. And so we want to build coalitions with people. We want to work with people. We want to be a bridge, essentially. And so that's what we've been doing. And so working with being able to tell stories about mandatory minimums and Calvin Bryant and these other issues are something that has been really really interesting to be able to essentially be able to convince people and get people on board and get people passionate outside of national politics at the end of the day, and really start to see people's lives be changed at the end of the day as well. And there's so many more stories like that we're going to push, and that's going to be our dedication for the next year, is going to be still bridging gaps between other organizations, from Surge to Americans for Prosperity. This is something that we can all work on and all do something about, and we're all on board with this. We just need to communicate well. And I've been going to all these meetings for each of these groups, these different groups, and Noah and these other folks, to be able to pull in these people and hopefully make some stuff happen. And so and on top of that, I think we're going to be continuing to explore other means and other ways of storytelling, some media, and as well, to be able to just increase transparency, increase the public's understanding of what's going on, to be able to tell people stories, and to be able to see two sides of each coin as much as possible. And so I try to be a systematic thinker as much as possible, and try to understand what unintended consequences the best as possible. Something that's really hard to do, but something that I really try to do, is know what I don't know. Sometimes that doesn't always work out, but that's one of the most important things to me, is to know that and listen to other people about those things, and have it and just be able to create a dialogue from there, essentially. And so I think that was kind of a wrap up of why I'm interested, and any questions from there, or?
Question from committee?
That was a lot.
Councilmember Mendes?
So there's you got a lot of passion for the Libertarian Party. And just, there's a lot of we in there. And so I'm curious if you could just comment on the distinction between that usage of we and the role with the, do you bring the we?
I'm the chairman of the organization, and I don't like to say me. But yeah, I lead these things, and so that's if that's was that your question?
Well, the question is, if you're on the board, are you bringing the we, or are you bringing your perspective?
That's a good question. So for me, I'll bring my. We are pretty individualist there in general at that degree, but I think I also want to be an aspect of the diversity on that panel, if that makes sense, right? I'm not like, coming from a different persuasion, coming from different communities, I hope to be able to represent and have some level of trust to those people, to be able to let them feel like the system actually works, right? That being said, I'm very personally principled, and I'm not going to. No one's going to ask me to do something, and if it's not what I want to do, or not what I think is right, I'm not going to do that at the end of the day. And that's how I would see that happening. And that would definitely be more on a personal basis. But I do believe it could bring a deep level of trust, I think, to these other organizations like that I'm already like around and have some experience with. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other question from the committee?
No.
Do you have any quick last statement in 30 seconds?
I think that's it.
Great, I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Mr.
I appreciate
Brown.
it.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers.
Do I shut this or? You're good, you're good. Thank you.
3 more candidates to go.
Don Majors. Huh.
Don and I were running for at-large at the same time, so we've heard each other's spiel
Yeah,
more
I know, I
than
was gonna
once.
say.
Oh, yeah. Doesn't that feel like a million years?
And yet, it's right around the corner again.
Good evening, Mr. Don Major.
Hi.
How you doing?
How you guys doing?
Doing great. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we have 10 minutes to spend each other, so please proceed however you feel comfortable.
Hi.
Like I feel like going home week. Well, obviously my name's Don Majors, and after the second incident that in the Austin Bob shooting, and where the young man died, with all the information about the Oversight Committee, I just became very concerned about the direction our city was headed in. And having been a 72-year lifelong resident, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and experienced all of that. And I just felt like maybe I could do some part in helping this Oversight Committee get to the point where they could recreate the trust and the mutual respect between the community and the police department. That's why I wanted to be a part of it. I think the second question was describing your background and familiarity with civil rights and equity issues. Like I said, being 72 years old, I've experienced the days where I can remember when my mother took me on the bus ride for the first time when I was 12 years old. And we got on the bus, walked to the back, passing all these empty seats, and I couldn't figure out why. And when I pulled a coattail and said, "Why come we don't sit in some of those empty seats?" And all she could say was, "Hush." And later on, it was explained to me. Going on with life, my dad worked for the DuPont company out in Old Hickory. He was a food worker, because at that time DuPont only allowed African Americans to work in food service or menial labor. And in 1962, before the Equal Opportunity Act was passed, which was in '64, the DuPont company decided they were going to integrate all of their plant operations, and they allowed African Americans that were working those menial jobs to go to work into the factory area and make the same kind of money that the whites were making then. And that had such a lasting impact on me because we lived in a 3-room shotgun house that didn't have indoor plumbing. And 6 months after my dad got that job, that promotion, we moved into a 7-room house with 2 bathrooms, an attic and a basement. Well, quite naturally, we thought we had died and gone to heaven. But, and as life progressed on, we happened to move into a neighborhood that was, we were the first blacks to move into that neighborhood, and I guess they called us blockbusters then, and then you could see the for sale signs going up. My sister lived in that house. It was built in 1928. She lived there until about 6 months ago and sold the house. But going further on with life, in 1974, my wife and I bought a house in Parkwood. Same situation.
95% of the neighborhood was white, and we kind of sale signs go up again. So I'm fairly familiar with that's some of the ugly, but there's also plenty of good. You know, I've lived a wonderful life. In 1974, I also got my son involved in youth baseball, and I was the program director for a youth baseball program that served 400 kids every year. And I did that for 12 years. And that's actually got me into politics. I knew so many people from my affiliation with the baseball program. And I ran for city council in '95, got elected easily, by the way. And
Back in the day.
and served 8 years on the council, got involved in a lot of things. I think one thing of note when it refers to equity issues, myself and Councilmember Chris Farrell sponsored living wage. We fought real hard for the living wage bill because there were some employees, Metro employees working at Bobbie Hospital and at General Hospital that were making so little money they were eligible for food stamps. Of course, the chamber was against it and fought it real hard. So we lost the vote on that. But Bill Purcell was the mayor then, and the following year he made it happen. So after that, my 8-year tenure in the council, I was very fortunate to be hired by Congressman Jim Cooper as a constituent services specialist and / field rep. That's where one of my assets, I'd say, was conflict resolution. I was assigned the task of dealing with constituents who had issues and with federal agencies or disputes. I sat down with them for 12 years doing this and worked things out between them and other agencies. And I also learned conflict resolution for being a program director at that ballpark, because when you deal with the parents of 400 kids, there's a lot of conflict resolution. But you know, I feel like this is a great opportunity to do something positive and change the direction that our city's going in. I said the other question involved experience with criminal justice and policing practices. While I was a member of the council, one of the things I did once a month was to participate in the ride-along program. After my first ride-along, I got a police radio scanner because it was so interesting, and I kept that thing for about 10 years, long after I got out of council. But I picked up a lot on what policemen have to go through day to day, and you know, I think it was vital to understand where they're coming from also, as well as the public, when it comes to confrontations or them trying to do what they are assigned to do. I really enjoyed that. In fact, I did it once a month for probably the entire time I was on the council. But it was really enlightening. I'm trying to think of something else that I could bring forth. You guys have any questions?
Any questions?
Maybe since you've got so many years in Nashville, give us your sense of whether you think the relationship between the police department and the community has changed over the years, and whether it's been for the better or worse.
Well, I think it's been for the better, but not enough. You know, I can remember when it wasn't so great, and it's gotten a lot better with new training, new techniques, and new policies. But it's still because, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that society has changed. We've got kids that don't think a lot about committing crimes. they don't think a lot about shooting each other. And that plays a big part in it. It's a give and take, you know. You've got to have some give and take on both sides. And you know, I think a lot of that's going to come from not only this oversight board being in place, but communications with the community, especially churches, getting in touch with them and letting them know what they can do to improve the situation.
Thank you, Councilman Majors. We have 30 seconds. Conclude your statement.
We got 30 seconds?
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Really
Okay.
appreciate you
All right.
stepping
Good to
up.
see you again.
All right, good to see all of y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Mr.
Hello.
Bobbie Hill. Good evening. Please have a seat and make yourself
Thank you.
comfortable. And we have 10 minutes to spend each other, so however you want to proceed. Those are 3 questions we would like you to address.
Ma'am,
Those are 3 questions you would like to address, so you can introduce us and including answering those 3 questions.
all righty. My name is Bobbie Hill, and I live at 2721 Combs Drive. Born in 1933, 85 years old, and still striving.
If you want to tell us why you want to serve on this Community Oversight Board?
Yes, you know, my whole life has been in public service, and I was a policeman for 33 years. Had the benefit of going to race relations school. The police department sent me there every year for 4 years, 2 weeks. And that was a real classic then, because back then things weren't too cool. And this was during the civil rights area. I headed intelligence in the police department for 12 years. And this was during the sit-ins. And I got to know a lot of the people in the city. And I was the mayor's driver and bodyguard for a long time, and we went all over the country together. And I was in the 60s, late 60s. I testified before Congress 3 times on riots and civil disorders. During the riots in Memphis, I was head of intelligence here. They sent me to Memphis on Colonel Davison's plane to help them deal with the situation down there. And I been in politics in the background, working for a long time, because during the civil rights area, I had people in the black groups, I had people in the Klan, and one particular area we had, I had guys working at the Ford plant who was working for us, and the Ford plant people came through Centennial in Jefferson Street every evening, and the kids out there would stand on the wall and break out windows and all. And one of my informants told me that the people at Ford plant had bought 16 shotguns and they were gonna come down Jefferson Street and shoot them off that wall at night. So I met with the mayor. The mayor gave me permission to go out to the Ford plant and have them come down another street to avoid that. See, I was in the mix of all that during that time, and I think the reason I really want to be on this board, the credibility of the police department, community is, there's a lot of misinformation out there because a lot of people taking sides with not all the information. And if we can get some people creditable on that board that restore the confidence of the community, crime will go down. And also we'll have a peaceful situation here. Nashville is a great town. You know, I love it. Came to Nashville the first time when I was 17 going to the Navy, you know, and this was a big city. You know, and after I got out of the Navy, I came back here to make this my home because it's a great place to live, you know. And so it's my desire, since I am getting old, you know, to help these young people realize what we have here. We have the nucleus of a beautiful city. And I hate it that it's being destroyed by rumors and innuendos and distrust. And if we can get enough credible people on the board to restore that confidence to the police department, we'll have a peaceful city here, and I want to contribute.
Appreciate it. Any question from the committee member?
Well, first, thank you for your service. And my father, who is 89, would say, you know, old people are only 20 years older than whatever you are right now.
Right.
And so I know you don't know any old people. But I really respect your perspective. And it's been a pleasure hearing your stories quite a bit. And I think that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the wisdom of this feels like a young town, but it's an old town. And
Right.
So I appreciate that perspective quite a bit.
I didn't tell you about where I gained a lot of experience. I was a counselor in prison, and I saw a lot of young people who, ever since they were born, they came up and it developed survival, knew nothing about Jesus Christ or Christian. And I started a class out there in CCA where everybody that was in CCA that wanted my classes before they got out, I'd have them 6 months before they got out. And working with those young people did a lot for me, and it gave me a lot of understanding of where our troubled youth are coming from, you know. And I hope to bring that to the table.
With all your experience in law enforcement, do you have an opinion about whether the officer involved shooting last summer was justified or not?
You know, unless you were there in 1968, the FBI and the courts came out with the deal. You cannot shoot at a fleeing felon, you know. But see, that's not absolute. It depends on what happens before that. And so me not knowing what the officer, you know, was really faced with, I can't make an opinion on that because, you know, they say they found a gun and all, but being in that position before, you can't make a judgment unless you know what's really going on. You see, and it looks like to me that people want a victim. You know, you have a kid that's killed, but you want to hang somebody for it, no matter what. And see, I'm afraid the justice system is reeling from public reactions, and it's going to react on that. But see, if this board works right, with people with no preconceived notions of what's going on, and you need to look at it, see, a lot of things wouldn't happen if people knew the real cause. See, this police chief that we have, he's upgraded everything since I left there. He's a good country boy, and a lot of the policemen don't like him because he holds them accountable. If you do a good job, you don't mind a camera on you recording it. See, the FOP, they're the old style. They want to protect their own, but you don't protect your own when you condone bad judgment.
I do appreciate it,
so much.
Mr. Hill. We
Thank you,
would like
Mr.
to
Hill.
spend more time with you, but our staff is telling our time is up.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much,
Mr.
really
Hill.
appreciate it.
And y'all have an awesome job.
Yes,
A lot of
you do.
people to pick from.
Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good night.
Hello.
Good evening,
how are you?
Mr. Bobbie Bracks. I appreciate your time
Yes,
being
ma'am.
here. And we have 10 minutes to spend, so however you want to proceed.
My name is Bobbie Bracks. The reason that I am wanting to be a part of the Community Oversight Board is, one, I consider it a privilege, and two, I consider it a responsibility. I know that a lot of the issues that the Community Oversight Board will deal with people from my demographic, from my age group, and I feel that it would be a good benefit to have individuals that could represent that as a spokesperson, but also someone that has a credible background, has a credible history, and has worked in the community to make that possible. In the community, for that, I was nominated through the Why We Can't Wait program, which is a group that helps individuals that are getting out of incarceration and helping them get back into the community. I've also taken it upon myself at the age of 29 to work with Habitat Humanity, work on getting some properties, and I currently have 2 individuals that work with the MDHA program. Right now, my current employment, I'm a Metro school, public school teacher, and I teach history at alternative school. I've been there 5 years. I started out as a campus supervisor, dealing with security, dealing with respect, dealing with the personal issues that are not necessarily taken care of that cause youth to end up in bad situations. From those experiences, I've gone deeper into helping with the community. Most of my civil rights experience has come from working with the NAACP, dealing with James Lawson, that worked with Dr. King during the 60s. I am an alumnus of Fisk University for undergrad art, and I'm also now going for my master's in clinical psychology. I plan to use that to focus on PTSD and the negative effects for veterans and also people that deal with violence in the community. In terms of my background with dealing with court and that process, I went through the process of being certified as an NRA handgun instructor, and during the time when I cannot help in the court system, I use that time to help individuals understand that a firearm is a responsibility. I give training to mothers and sons at the same time to have them aware, to open up the conversation so guns can be used correctly as tools for safety and not for negativity. Other than that, the most effective things that I think that I can bring to the Community Oversight Board is a positive image, the ability to look at a situation from more than one angle, to be honest on both sides, and be willing to listen. I feel that listening is the biggest issue that we both have. We come to the table, we think we know what we want, we hear the other person, it goes back and forth from dealing with youth, from both angles, from having family in law enforcement and the military. I understand how important it is to listen. So I feel like that's what I can bring.
Any question from the committee
No,
member?
you mentioned family and law enforcement.
Yes,
Can you
ma'am.
expand on that?
Yes, ma'am. My father-in-law is a member of the ATF. He's been in there for the past 20 years. My uncle, he is 34, and he has been in law enforcement for the past 5 years. He came from being, I'm not sure what branch, but he had been in the military before that, so he came back. But that is one of the personal issues that I have connected with that. My extended family, my father was in, my grandfather, I apologize, was in World War II. He received a Bronze Star in World War II. Other than that, I have other individuals in law enforcement that have helped me make the transition between, hey, you're doing the security part, now you see what we're dealing with. Now you know that we say, look, it's harder than it looks. Don't take everything from what you see right off the video. Until you sit down, look at the facts, you review it, you hear both sides, be quiet.
What agency does your uncle work for?
My uncle?
Yeah, in law enforcement. You said.
You said ATF?
It's
Yeah.
ATF, my
Oh.
father-in-law.
There were two. One was ATF, and who does the other one work for?
He works for the police department in North Carolina.
Okay, thank you.
You touched on a little bit about age representation on the
Yes.
board, having, I would assume a wide range, but
Yes.
specifically about having younger members on the board. Can you talk
Yes.
just a little bit more about why you think that's important?
I think it's important because most of the time those individuals may have issues that may keep them away from wanting to be part of the conversation and saying, hey, look guys, this is what's going on. And the perceptions, the preconceived ideas, the media, everything makes people think, oh, hey, you're not supposed to do that. But we have to fight against that image and say, look, if you're serious about the issues that you say you have, you got to be willing to do more than get on social media and jump around and be crazy. You need to be able to sit down, listen, respect other people's opinion, and show up. I don't think that enough people in our age group see that as being important, and I see that as being important.
Do you have an opinion about whether the officer-involved shooting last summer was justified or not?
I don't want to go into extreme detail off of that because I don't have all the facts. If I did, then I would feel like, hey, I could give an honest opinion, but I have respect for both sides. I do not know all the facts, but from what I've seen, it has raised issues in the community that I feel that the Community Oversight Board can give that will address issues for everyone. So,
thank you.
Yeah. Excellent.
That's what I was hoping you were going to
Yeah.
say.
Do you have any comment, closing remarks?
Thank you for your time. I appreciate you guys being here all day, my goodness. So just kudos to you all because I appreciate the hard work.
Thanks for your.
No, thank you.
Yeah, really
Thank you for
appreciate
serving
you
as a teacher.
coming.
Yep.
Thank you.
You know,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thursday
thanks for
evening.
teaching.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.